What was the British perspective on the American Revolution? It can be summed up in one word: ingratitude. Britain, after all, had saved its American colonies from French domination by winning the French and Indian War, 1756 to 1763, known as the 7 Years' War in Europe. But wars are expensive. The British were prepared to foot 80% of the bill. It had every reason to expect that the colonists would be willing, if not happy, to pay the rest. Parliament's first attempt at collection was the Stamp Act of 1765, a new tax on paper and printed materials. This had the great disadvantage of hitting precisely those people who were most likely to complain: lawyers, merchants, and journalists. And complain they did, loudly, with boycotts and protests. The Tea Act of 1773 was, likewise, ill-conceived. By giving the colonists the opportunity to buy cheaper tea from the British East India Company, the British endangered the business model of rich East Coast importers. They were making a fortune selling more expensive Dutch tea, so preferred the status quo. These merchants employed many of the men who, on the night of the 16th of December 1773, dressed up as Indians and threw 342 cases of tea into Boston Harbour, an act of rebellion that became known as the Boston Tea Party. Had the British at this juncture truly endeavoured to understand Americans' grievances, they might have salvaged their relationship with the colonies, but that would have required extraordinary statesmen. Unfortunately, no such leadership could be found in London. Of the 14 prime ministers who served under King George III during his nearly 60-year reign, only 2 were truly first class: William Pitt the Elder and his son William Pitt the Younger, and neither served during the years of the American Revolution. By contrast, the Americans were led by men of remarkable talents. Britain had no hope when faced with a soldier possessing the leadership qualities of George Washington, a lawyer with the forensic mind of John Adams, an orator as inspiring as Patrick Henry, a diplomat with the charm of Benjamin Franklin, and a wordsmith as gifted as Thomas Jefferson. It was Jefferson who cast George III as the great villain of the crisis, by claiming in the Declaration of Independence that he was a prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant, unfit to be the ruler of a free people. In fact, George was the personification of an enlightened monarch, but by July 1776, the Americans had made up their minds. There was no turning back. America's Declaration, from the British perspective, is a curious document. The first third of it is written in sublime, almost Shakespearean prose that still has the power to make one proud to be human, invoking the laws of nature and of nature's God, and proclaiming the self-evident truth of men being created equal, and so on. Then the second part, a full 2/3 of it, presents a series of no fewer than 28 unsupported ad hominem charges against George III, only 2 of which hold water: imposing taxes on the colonists without their consent, and disbanding colonial legislatures. If George III had been the tyrant described by Jefferson, the Americans wouldn't even have had this discussion. A tyrant would have stationed troops in major American cities before the outbreak of the Revolution, which George only did once in the rebellious hotbed of Boston in October 1768. He would have closed newspapers and arrested editors, which he never did. He would have disbanded the 1765 Stamp Act Congress and the First Continental Congress convened in 1774, which he didn't do. He would certainly have arrested the ringleaders of the Boston Tea Party. In this regard, the Americans, like the Indians led by Gandhi in the 20th century, should consider themselves very lucky in who their so-called oppressors were. The British committed their share of wartime atrocities, no doubt, but compared to almost every other oppressor in history, they were ultimately restrained by their moral scruples. These were reflected in the internal debates within England, led by men like the great political philosopher and influential Member of Parliament, Edmund Burke, who, if they didn't support full separation from the mother country, were sympathetic to the American cause. Finally, the British underestimated the rebels' resolve and overestimated the number of colonials who supported the Crown. George and his ministers confidently expected British troops would be greeted as liberators by most Americans. They were wrong, as they were about so many other assumptions they made about the rebels. George Washington and the Continental Army didn't exactly win the Revolutionary War, but they never had to. They only had to not lose it. After 8 years of struggle, those ungrateful Americans got what they wanted: independence. What they did with it was what made them truly great. I'm Andrew Roberts, author of The Last King of America, The Misunderstood Reign of George III, for Prager University. Thank you for watching this video. To keep PragerU videos free, please consider making a tax-deductible donation.